On the first so-called Palm Sunday parade, there were two competing parades coming into Jerusalem. One with Jesus riding on a donkey, the other with Pontius Pilate riding a giant white stallion. Jesus, with a motley crew of disciples, followed with his followers on foot. Pontius Pilate with a company of soldiers and horses leading the way, keeping him safe. Hordes of the poor and oppressed throwing palms and old coats they could barely part with, on the dusty road before Jesus. And Pontius Pilate on his stallion, clacking along the paved streets, leading to the courts of the high religious leaders. Pontius Pilate leading the way to the headquarters of the empire. Jesus leading his way toward the hill called Golgotha. As we try to appropriate something helpful from this first Palm Sunday parade, which parade will we follow? The donkey of peace? The white stallion of the empire? Which one? The parade of palms or the parade of military might and power? In fact, there are many parades as we think about it these days, not really parades, but marches and protests. So many unfortunate reasons to have those protests and those marches. Covenant Presbyterian School in Nashville, a school that used to be part of a Presbyterian church. They had differences of agreement, they split, and just this past week, the killing of 3 students and three adults brought them back together. Protest parades in at least 34 states that are seeking to take away the individual and family rights to support our precious children and young people seeking their true gender identity. In Kentucky, the state legislature just this past week or earlier overrode the governor's veto of a bill that will now bans medical and other care for transgender youth under 18 and limits discussion of gender identity in schools. The misguided empire invades the schools and homes and medical offices and families, controlling parental rights to manage and decide about the mental and physical health of their children and youth. Shall I go on? I don't think I need to. You watch the news. I don't want to get any more depressed than I already am about some of this. Not unlike the crowds that day following Jesus, not unlike the crowds wanting to find some hope for their lives, they had heard about him and his healing powers, about his compassion and love, and they would risk it all to even get a glimpse of Jesus. Just as Miss Trish said this morning, to get up close and personal and get a glimpse, even to touch him, was a great miracle. They also know firsthand about the corrupt empire represented by the other parade coming into Jerusalem, led by none other than Pontius Pilate. Who is Pilate anyway? We every year at Easter, this time, we talk about this man, and we don't talk about him much, hardly at all, the rest of the year. Who is he? Well, he's the governor of Judea. He's the comptroller, he's the supreme judge, and the commander-in-chief, all rolled up into one. He lives in Caesarea Maritima, the official palace of Pilate. and on a 2023 map that's located between Joppa and Tel Aviv in Israel. So why does Pilate come to Jerusalem? Traditionally, Pilate paraded into Jerusalem on the first day of Passover week, entering the west gate, the front gate, with legions of chariots and horses and foot soldiers dressed for battle and armed with swords and spears. Pilate represents the empire with his status of wealth and authority. And like all other leaders of the empire, he's also a politician. So you know what to expect here. He has to be concerned with his constituents, especially the religious leaders of the time. But all of those following Jesus are his constituents also, because they get robbed of their meager incomes to pay taxes to support the empire. Now, Jesus has been telling his disciples for a long time that he had to make this trip to Jerusalem. And at least the disciples should know this now, for at least 3 times in the 3 different Gospels, the Gospel writers have Jesus telling them that he will come to Jerusalem. He will be killed, murdered, and on the 3rd day, he will be resurrected. Can we even imagine Jesus knowing all this and still riding that little donkey into the city? Because he is Jesus. That's why he does this. Because he is Jesus. Because he is full of love for the oppressed and the captives of the evil empire and those who follow him. In Matthew's gospel, he lives out his mission to bring relief to the oppressed and hope to the people. During his entry into Jerusalem, on this Palm Sunday donkey, Jesus tells a variety of parables. He announces the religious leaders he's teaching as he's going into Jerusalem. He tells of the destruction of the temple. And in Mark's gospel, he cleanses the temple, and then he really, really does it. He messes with the money of the people in the temple, because there was a money-making establishment. But as offensive act as could be taken against the commerce carried out by the temple leaders. He messed with their money, and they are angry, offended to the point of arresting him and bringing him before the authorities. Now, after his arrest, he's brought before the authorities, and thus we find this encounter in Matthew 27 between Jesus and Pilate. So what role does Pilate play in this plot the authorities have set up to stop Jesus? To end Jesus' ministry in the world. Is he, Pontius Pilate, an active accomplice to the religious leaders' plot to kill Jesus? Or is it possible somehow that he would defend Jesus? Is his wife also an accomplice, because she tells Pontius Pilate she's had this bad dreams. You need to get rid of this. Wash your hands of this man. We know that many of Jesus' followers would want Pilate to release him to them. But we know that's not what happens. Pilate follows a normal ritual of releasing a prisoner, but not Jesus. So did you notice in Matthew, verse 24, so when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. Pilate gives in to the people of the empire and does nothing to prevent a trumped-up charge against Jesus. He washes his hands. My friends, how do we respond to the opportunities we have, even today, April 2nd, 2023, to keep our commitment to Jesus by speaking up about our faith, about the power of Jesus' presence in our lives, about getting so close up to him that we can touch him and we can really see his story? How do we avoid the temptation to which Pilate gave into? To wash our hands of our relationship with Jesus when people push back against our faith? To give in to public pressure or not put our spiritual life before the world? To become an accomplice to those who would cast doubts upon the strength of God's love and healing in these times? I pray you will find the strength today and during this Holy Week to follow Jesus, even the tragic events of his life during Holy Week. Then, when we gather in the varied ways that we can this Easter Sunday, let us remember the ultimate outcome of God's great act of raising Jesus to new life. We become an active defender of the one riding to Jesus on a lowly donkey, and not an accomplice of one riding the big white stallion. Indeed, which parade will you follow this day? Amen.